Senatus Populusque Aeternos, the sacred seal of the Roman Republic in Minecraft. This most glorious civilization is also its most self-destructive. From conquering the world to deifying Minecraft's pancake Julius Caesar, this is the epic journey of Minecraft's Roman Republic of Aeterna on the internet's largest world-building server, play.stoneworks.gg. The old world of Eldom was on fire. The comet had come. The Great War of the Worlds turned their cities to ash. The sacred church was stained with the blood of the faithful, and the Pope, Ancap, carried his people out of the burning wreckage to the ships, where they escaped the land as it froze into darkness. Their lord and savior Gonf, a player who in ancient times preached peace and resurrected after his crucifixion, appeared to them in a prophetic vision. You shall travel the world of Abexilas until the wolves help you hunt in the land between rivers, where you will find a circle of 10 raised stones, and between them an eagle devouring a goat. From these seats, the res publica shall rule. You shall raise my cross over the world. So the Gonfists from Eldom, still yearning for their old frozen homes, sighted the horizons of Abexilas, where they traveled around until finding the prophesized rivers of the northern continent, Tiberia. Ancap and the old Aeternan nobles broke ground for the new Church of Gonf, building up his own Vatican city-state of Aeterna. But his new church was vulnerable, surrounded to the north and south by numerous players in a kingdom of many gods, Eos Astral. Ancap negotiated with them to be absorbed into Eos Astral for his church's protection, but he didn't know that he had just hitched his ancient and sacred church to a leaking ship sailing into a storm. Aeterna's history under Eos Astral is something of the Roman monarchical period. Except for 7 legendary kings, it's the Pope guiding the city-state, trying to spread the influence of Gonfism to cement the ancient church in this new world. Ancap curated a strong diocese here among the Eoses, converting people en masse, appointing the Chancellor Secret Shirt 565 as a bishop, baptizing the king Huntmind I, and attempting to mediate a brewing war with the neighboring kingdom. But there was a problem. Since Ancap had hitched his church to the state, people began associating the religion with Eos Astral's politics, and these politics became a destructive whirlwind. Border skirmishes with the dwarven kingdom of Krumaz, vassalization under their neighbor Mycenae, a terrorist militia splitting off and going east, and organizing their own rival faith of polyastralism. Eos cycled from forming a great empire, joining a giant coalition, teetering from royal factionalism, fighting a great continental war, their empire collapsing, seeing the coalition collapsing, brewing war with Mycenae, the Chama tribe invading and collapsing Mycenae, the terrorist militia assassinating King Huntmind, and lots of people blaming Eos for all of this. The Eoses, in their grand cities worshipping the stars, became depressed and despondent. So Ancap approached the Eosi king and asked to be independent, and the king agreed. In celebration, the people held a triumph of independence, proclaiming that they would be a republic with everyone working together into a harmonious future. Ancap brought in the master builders of Eos to construct a triumphal arch, lavish temples, and the public forum. This would be the era of the Senatus Populusque Aeternos. And in the coming weeks, Eos would see further decline as its leaders resigned from their posts and its people migrated elsewhere. So King Huntmind II and Secret Shirt 565 petitioned Aeterna to annex them back, and Ancap adopted them as a full province, with Huntmind taking a permanent seat in the Patrician Senate, and Secret Shirt 565 becoming the proconsul governor of Eos Astral. But the Pope could not predict that Aeterna's culture would grow proud and imperialistic over their new province. And while they were distracted, agents from the terrorist militia began infiltrating the city disguised as plebeians. And so began the Senate meetings. Its nobilis and patrician classes were dominating with their hefty weighted votes, and the plebeians had their own assembly to pass and ratify legislation. It was all arguing, proposals, vetoes, prohibitos to condemn political rivals, the provincial senators clawing for more funding, gathering voters, elections for the consul leaders, praetor commanders, proconsul governors, the whole political game jam-packed into one squabbling chamber. And among them was an upstart populist named Mr. Pancake 21, who happened to be in a bit of trouble for killing a Gonfist abbot and being made to kiss the Pope's ring. But just then a messenger arrived with a letter from a group called the Terrorist Militia. The leading consul militaris, OK Puddles, read it out to the Senate. The terrorist militia, led by the old EOC player Zizend, was unhappy with Aeterna's annexation of Eos Astral, so now Aeterna would inherit their sins and face the consequences imminently. The Aeternans didn't know what to make of it and murmured apathetically, but the EOC senators, Secret Shirt 565 and Huntmind, stood and pleaded with them to respond. My witnesses from Eos Astral, we know of the danger posed by the terrorist militia. Did they not leave us just to join our enemies? Did they not steal and vandalize? Did they not build Thomas the Tank Engine to bring about climate change and assassinate our first great king? These are no idle threats. It is the lives of your city at stake. So the Senate shrugged and elevated Praetor Militaris Strange Social and the young military tribune Soinsu III to fix the problem, and the consul OK Puddles lent them a legion of soldiers to work with. But while they were planning, they exposed a core problem. They knew where the terrorist militia's base was, but an attack on Aeterna City could come from any direction, made worse by a large Gonfist mass and political rally scheduled for the same day. So after hours of deliberation, they decided that they'd station guards around the city perimeter to stop anyone from sneaking in, and the rest would guard in the forum where they could watch over the events from a distance. The day of festivities came around, and the military surveyed the bustling city with great caution. But things were peaceful in the political rally and Gonfist mass. As the sun started to set, Strange Social and Soinsu III felt creeping relief that everything would be alright. But as Pope Ancap led his congregation in a kneeling benediction prayer, the player 52 shed his disguise and drew daggers, jumping on the helpless churchgoers, cutting and slicing through innocent civilians with murderous glee. Panic rose as a screaming crowd rushed out of the church, and the crowds had to push and shove against the fleeing torrent to make their way inside. But 52 had escaped in the confusion, but the church was strewn with blood and 11 dead bodies. The Senate adjourned and laid blame upon Strange Social and Soinsu III. They had failed in their duty to protect their citizens, but they petitioned them to see reason. The terrorist militia must have already infiltrated the city days before the massacre. None of us had expected this, and no guard can tell a disguised villain from a citizen in there. So the Senate murmured, and they spared them punishment. But as the traumatized citizens re-emerged into daily life, with side-eyed paranoia around every corner, the older Strange Social brought young Soinsu III behind the temple and lit a sacrificial fire. There, he cut the tribune's hand open and held it up, making him swear an oath of blood and fire. Their hatred would be eternal, and they would one day arrest the destiny of this militia. About a week later, the nation woke up to smoke in the air. On May 11th at 9:40 a.m., two unknown players flew their elytras with inventories full of TNT into the rostra pillars in the Aeternan Forum. Smoke billowed from this central symbol of the Republic. They were under attack. The patrician alias Cato watched in horror from his window, worried for his beloved Republic. Consul Militaris OK Puddle proposed to the Senate declare a state of emergency, where the Senate could exercise all constitutional powers without veto to respond to the attacks. But alias Cato railed against the measures as a threat to the Republican institutions. The frightened senators disagreed though, and they voted 7-2 to declare an emergency. The young populist Mr. Pancake 21 stood in the forum and rallied the populace, pointing blame at the terrorist militia. Mr. Pancake said that the Senate must pass the Senatus Consultum Ultimum, and that he should be appointed Princeps Civitatis with full dictatorial powers to solve the crisis and restore the capital. This didn't make any sense to the censor alias Cato. Mr. Pancake 21 was already a consul. If he wanted anything done quickly, he would just have to convince the other consul Secret Shirt 565. That would take half an hour max. Gunning for Princeps Civitatis was just a power grab. Pancake might be trying to take over the Republic. The staunch Republican patrician, DJ Stalin, being the only other senator who voted against emergency powers, told alias Cato that he had seen Pancake's political ally, I Get No Girls lol, whispering in the ear of the other senators. While Pancake was in the forum declaring the people's war against the terrorist militia, his cronies were dealing out all sorts of promises so the people would support his dictatorial powers. Soinsu III supported Pancake for his attacks on the terrorist militia. The Prohibitoed players OK Saya and OK Berg were promised full citizen rights, and many others simply wanted Pancake to advance their career and elevate their social status. Slowly, people were turning in favor of the drastic Senatus Consultum Ultimum. It was a whole conspiracy to give the Republic up to this young populist madman. In the forum, one plebeian was handing out pamphlets. 511 was an inside job, a false flag for the consul to coup the Senate. Gunpowder can't melt quartz beams. This wasn't helping, so Alias tried to at least stall the conspiracy. He shouted at the rallying Pancake, "Commission an investigation! You say it was the terrorist militia, but will you not check and prove it?" The crowd hissed at him, but Pancake coyly agreed and found consular consensus to investigate. The investigators found who had staged the attack, the foreign player River07, not involved with the terrorist militia. But Pancake's rallies got even more aggressive. "The terrorist militia was the secret orchestrator. By appointing me princeps, I will dig up the root cause of this danger for you, and then we will finally pass what you deserve, the grain dole, restoring the forum to its former glory, and taxing the nation's megastores that you buy into." The crowd cheered, and Pancake's support became overwhelming, and they shushed Alias Cato's caution at every turn. The Senate meeting to vote on the Senatus Consultum Ultimum was tomorrow. By the emergency powers, it could not be vetoed, and it was clear that Pancake's conspiracy had enough support from every angle to pass. Alias Cato could do nothing as a censor to stop it, so would he quietly cooperate and keep his position, or would he honor his patrician family that went all the way back to the founding of the Republic? So he started penning a letter of compliance to Pancake's conspiracy before the next session. The Senate House adjourned and heard the motion. Appoint Mr. Pancake 21 as princeps civitatis for the next half-election term, where he has full imperium and legal authority above the constitutional order, which he may extend upon his own declaration. And one by one, the senators stood up and approved it. 7 yes votes, 1 no vote from DJ Stalin as one of the original Republican founders. But DJ Stalin's opposition inspired Alias Cato. He couldn't vote yes, not to overturn the Republic, so he stood and stomped on his letter of compliance and shouted at the senators, "This man sets up an attack on the rostra, goads the plebs into cheap promises, gives himself the power of tyrants, and you all stand and sit at his beckoning? Shame on you all!" Alias Cato then threatened to resign from the Senate and stormed out, and the Senatus Consultum Ultimum officially elevated Mr. Pancake 21 as the princeps civitatis. This was met with public jubilation, as Pancake commissioned the grain dole, restored the forum, established the national bank, and elevated his allies in the Senate, all while Alias Cato was met with hissing crowds wherever he went, who accused him of betraying the Republic. But Alias Cato and DJ Stalin witnessed Pancake's reach extend further still, out over the plebeian assembly. Pancake's ally, Saya, pushed motions to make it easier for anyone to run for tribune, and stirred hatred between the two factions, and they were kept too busy attacking each other, and thus they didn't notice the Senate slipping further and further into Pancake's hands. One night later in the week, someone had placed a gold diadem, like a crown, atop the statue of Mr. Pancake 21 in the forum. The Senate ordered it removed, and Mr. Pancake abrogated any responsibility. He did not want to be a king. No. It was at this point that Senator the Emperor 145, who had voted for the Senatus Consultum Ultimum, confided in Alias Cato. He had been right to be wary of Pancake's ambition. This had been a mistake. Pancake could extend his dictatorial powers for life if he so wished. But they couldn't stand around worrying for too long, as just then, they were being invaded. The Chama tribe, renowned for their mighty warriors, had crossed over the western mountains and were setting up a defensive encampment. If they weren't careful, the Chama would cut off the road to the aristocratic estates of Coelestis Solaris, where they could butcher the families there. The Senate flew into chaos. Princeps Pancake proposed appointing the pleb Sebi V as the Princeps Conciliarios. This was another role above the Constitution, and Sebi V stepped forward and swore he would not let the Princeps Conciliarios position go to waste, no matter who lived or died. But the patricians in the Senate objected to this. To let a lowly pleb take so much power. During the debate, the Chama sent them taunting letters. Saya stood up and made the case to appoint Sebi. It would only be a temporary title. The invading tribe must be dealt with now. They are building defenses. But the patrician Alias Cato objected still. This was yet another power grab by the princeps. Soon all his friends would be above the Sacred Republic, and they'd all get their own statues with diadems. Some of the senators booed him, but the Senate received a new taunting message, this time with a civilian's severed head. Pancake stood up and waved his hands. Enough! Sebi will be appointed as my princeps conciliarius, and the magistrates are now prohibited from even speaking with the Chama. So Sebi raised a legion and marched the road west upon the Chama fortifications, witnessing the black ashes of crops and ransacked empty homes. They arrived at the encampment. Its plank walls were low and shabby, and the Chama warriors were all scattered working about. But they'd already made sure to stick a citizen's head out front on a post. Sebi ordered the legion forth through a gap, and the startled Chama grabbed their weapons, only cobbling a small force together to hold them off. But some arrows and javelins still met their mark in the soldiers' shields and chests. The legion advanced, hacking and slashing with cold, brutal efficiency, and the panicked tribesmen fled from their camp back west to their lands. The encampment was captured, its treasure looted, and the estates of Coelestis Solaris were safe. Sebi V and the legion returned to Aeterna in celebration, and the people held a triumph in his glory, with paintings of the battle and this. But Aelius Cato's patrician nobilitas could not stomach the celebration of Pancake's power, so he slipped away to the empty Senate house and found it hauntingly dim and vacuous as the celebrations roared outside, and so he threw down his censor's letter of resignation to the floor. But this gave the ambitious plebeian DJ Let's Shake the opening to run for censor instead, as part of Pancake's movement. So DJ Let's Shake sat outside the Senate house and eavesdropped, because no plebs were allowed in there. And he transcribed the Senate meeting so perfectly that the Senate commissioned him to compile the constitutional documents into one big book. And so DJ Let's Shake sat outside the Senate house for 7 days straight, through sun, rain, and cold, perfectly deconstructing and recompiling the Constitution without any errors or changes, and winning his election for censor. But as victory and triumph started to dwindle away, the city felt a creeping paranoia. If the Chama could encroach on them so easily from their protected mountainous west, what could be plotting to their feeble north and east? The terrorist militia had been stalking the Senator Honey 17,000's movements during his re-election campaign in the capital. In the dead of night, the militia leader Zizend, Antimanity, and 52 snuck into the city, bagged him, left a taunting letter demanding ransom, and carried him off to their hideout on the bridge. When the others found Honey missing, they called an emergency Senate meeting to organize a response. But as the Praetor Militaris Strain Social was speaking, rallying the Senate to send the whole army after the terrorist menace, TNT dropped from the roof of the Senate house, explosions racked the floor, and Strain Social and a few others were left dead and dying. So the assembly rose in alarm. They unanimously appointed Soinsu III Praetor Militaris. Soinsu coordinated with the Consul Militaris I Get No Girls lol to raise a legion, and they hired expert auxiliary mercenaries as the frontline troops. In a few hours, they set off east toward the terrorist militia's base on this heavily fortified bridge. Along the way, they were met with a corridor, handing over a letter saying Honey 17,000 was being tortured. They were running out of time to pay his ransom, the letter opening up to show Honey's gouged out eyeball. The legion picked up the pace and soon came upon this castle bridge. Praetor Militaris Soinsu surveyed the defensive position keenly. They'd have to bridge over spiked trenches, then blow and dig a hole through the wall large enough for the legion to walk through. Then they'd have to find Senator Honey 17,000, all while fending off the terrorist militia's assaults, hoping that he'd still be alive. And the terrorist leader Zizend yelled down from the wall, "You better be here to pay Honey's ransom, or it's his other eye!" But the legion stood silent. "Ready? Procedite!" The Aeternans launched forward, and the militia shot down at them. The engineers bridged across. Some lost footing and were impaled on the spikes below. The auxilia flew onto the defenses and cut down their garrison one by one, giving an opening to the engineers, digging through its obsidian interior. So the Aeternan legion marched forward, over the bridge, and into the stronghold uncontested. But as their column pushed forward, militia fighters poured out from the flanks. It turned into an all-out scrap. The auxiliae hunting down the militia fighters, the legion enveloping them. The militia's armor grew damaged and weak. They started to panic. Everyone pulled back, and they ran out in a disorganized retreat. The soldiers followed after them, but behind them on the bridge, some were caught in the militia's trap. Soinsu grabbed his commanders and told them, "Look for the senator!" But as they went down to scour the strongholds, the weakened militia fell upon them, their harassment drawing them out on useless chases. But one of the commanders shouted they had found Honey 17,000, and Soinsu rushed to free him of his binds. But just then, Zizend sprang out with a sword to finish the senator off, but Soinsu drew his bow and shot him down in the foot. He was toppled down in front of the hostage. The legion arrested him, the battered militia's harassment tapered off, and Senator Honey 17,000 was saved. Soinsu and the Legion returned with the militia leaders as prisoners for Aeterna City. While Soinsu reported the events of the battle to Consul Militaris I Get No Girls lol, the consul chastised him for his rash attack. That easily could have gotten the hostage senator killed, but the consul congratulated him on the victory with 0 losses. Zizend, 52, and Antimanity were marched out into the forum in front of a crowd of onlookers. They were sentenced to death by hanging. Zizend argued that they must have a trial for him. He even bought a lawyer already. But no. While setting up the gallows, the frame broke apart, and in the confusion, the militia fighter 52 escaped from his guards and ran off. The terrorist Antimanity waited while the Aeternans fixed the gallows and accepted his fate, and he looked out on the people he had terrorized before dropping to strangulation. But Zizend had one more trick up his sleeve. As he approached the gallows for his death sentence, one of his hired thugs approached them, and he stabbed Zizend in the stomach and ran off. He had already been paid. The leader 52 was still at large, and as the Aeternans held a funeral for Strain Social, he appeared with a sword, but the Legion guards dealt with him. So Soinsu 3 took the bodies and burned them on a sacrificial pyre. The terrorist militia threat was dead. As Soinsu 3 stood over the last militia fighter, he didn't feel anything. But Aeterna was now emboldened, strong in having destroyed the terroristic threat plaguing the region. But some in the provinces would come to call this pompousness, oppression, and reasons for civil war. Praetor Militaris Honey 17,000 read out a letter to the Senate that he received from their friendly neighbor of Krumaz. Last the Senate had heard, King Valus of the Krumazi dwarves had agreed to submit himself as a client king under Aeterna. Their economy was faltering as the dwarven clans started refusing to meet their mining quotas, and the population was declining as others moved elsewhere for opportunity. Under the fiery leadership of the Aeternans, Valus hoped that his kingdom would be supported to get back on its feet. But this letter changed everything. Honey 17,000 read out that Valus had convened the leaders of the clans together in his great hall to announce their subjugation to Aeterna. But some of the proud Krumazi dwarves, stubborn in their traditionalist and xenophobic ways, rejected the king's decision outright. And the clan leader Chef Zombie 12 shot him through the heart with a bow and arrow, right there in front of everyone. These traditionalists fled the summit room and mobilized their armies as the Free Clans, and they set upon destroying the loyalist followers who approved of Valus's decision to become a client kingdom of Aeterna. The kingdom of Krumaz had collapsed into civil war. The Free Clans, under player Chef Zombie 12, secured control of the city, Dorn Khazrak, as they and their hill tribes imprisoned the city's loyalist governor from Clan Hammerhood, and elevated his ambitious brother as their own allied governor. Some of the city loyalists sought refuge in the city's Ankoran temple, but the Free Clans set their soldiers upon them, massacring the civilians in the temple. The Free Clans proclaimed themselves the righteous follower of their 9 gods. How could any real king sell out the sacred race, the anointed monarchy, the sovereignty of their great halls, all to the Aeternan snakes? But the loyalists proclaimed themselves the righteous followers of the 9, as assassinating the king and butchering his followers in the temple was a confident betrayal of the sacred kingdom. All the while, the high priest Suyut refused to step in, as he was busy meditating in the heart of the chief god Tokad to keep him alive. The erupting civil war was of petty significance to the gods. And so, the kingdom was about to tear itself apart. The Aeternan Senate was admittedly confused by all this uncivilized dwarven mumbo-jumbo, but the implication was clear. If the Free Clans won this war, Krumaz would not become a client kingdom, and they'd be faced with a hostile regime of dwarven zealots on their doorstep. The Senate voted to raise legions in preparation, but to delay intervening until directly called upon by the loyalist forces. But Consul Mr. Pancake 21 threw this to the wind, and he illegally raised a legion and marched out to occupy a small section of Krumazi land on their border. The Senate quietly let Pancake's rash occupation slide, and they continued to wait for the call by the Krumazi loyalists. Little did they know that the son of the late king and loyalist faction leader Prince Chrysothic had sent a messenger to call for Aeterna's legions to aid them in an upcoming battle, as the prince had settled his loyalist kin forces in the holy city of Dura Gabar. But now the Free Clan forces had encircled his position in a siege. But Prince Chrysithic's messenger was intercepted and executed by the Free Clan Hill tribes, so the besieged prince was unknowingly left without any legion reinforcement. The kin of the crown loyalists rapidly constructed a wooden palisade to protect their great doors to the mountain keep, but in the dead of night, the besieging Free Clan attackers assaulted the walls, climbing up them with siege ladders. The kin garrison held them back for only some moments before the Free Clans broke through and bashed the doors of the keep open. But Prince Chrysithic drew the attacking contingent down into the bridge of the keep, where he called upon reserve soldiers that poured out from the side rooms, entrapping the isolated Free Clan warriors and striking them down. The Battle of Duragabar raged all night inside these wooden walls, the loyalists firing a barrage of arrows out the keep's great door. But by daybreak, the Free Clan attack had been routed, and the loyalist kin troops stayed victorious. But in the following days, the retreating Free Clan army attacked the garrison in the little mountain pass fort of Ithamar. The garrison delivered them heavy losses, but they tore through it and captured it for themselves. The Free Clans then pounced on the blacksmith stronghold of Vel Ukad, fortifying an encampment in front of it. So Prince Chrysithic fortified the western end of the mountain pass and sent his army around the mountains to meet up with the Aeternan Legion under Pancake and Soinsu, approaching the Free Clan camp outside the stronghold from the north. They set up a small stone base on the periphery of Vel Ukad and launched an assault on the city. There were no clever tactics or maneuvering in this battle, just brutal hand-to-hand fighting between the warriors of the Free Clan, King of the Crown, and the Aeternan Legion. But after cutting through them on the surface, the loyalists and Aeternans punctured into the mountain keep, marching out onto bridges over the chasm tombs of the Frostbeard clan, and one by one, the rest of the Free Clan warriors were wrestled down and submitted, except the Free Clan general Chef Zombie 12 remained alive, and in a last desperate attempt, he called to Prince Chrysithic to face him in an honorable duel over the chasm. The Aeternan generals ordered him to not entertain this little specie of victory that the Free Clans were grasping for, but Prince Chrysithic stubbornly refused them, for to truly win the hearts and mind of the Dwarven Kingdom, he needed to show honor and courage. The Aeternans rolled their eyes, and Prince Chrysithic went out onto the bridge, ready to make the king's dream a reality with the noble Aeternans, ready to slay the man that killed his father. But Chef Zombie 12 lobbed arrows at his approach. The young Chrysithic blocked and dodged them. He leapt up with his axe and broke through the traitor's armor, but Chef Zombie's sword pierced him and knocked him back. But Chrysithic jumped up and sunk his axe into Chef Zombie's head, striking him down over the tomb of his ancestors. The Free Clans were defeated. Their leaders were dead. The warriors of the loyalist kin sang his praises, but when he went to the generals of the Aeternan camp, they ignored him, instead drawing up maps of their new province, giddily handing out praetorships and new posts for the bank to control. In the coming days, the Senate passed a bill making Chrysithic the proconsul of the province of Krumaz, and ensured a lifetime seat in the Senate for him. Chrysithic prosecuted the leaders of the rebellion, and executed high-level Free Clan leaders for their treason. But proconsul Chrysithic saw as the Aeternans draped their red eagle flags over their sacred homes, they waved money in the faces of the dwarves to adopt their togas, and to go to the decrepit old Pope Ancap to be baptized away from their traditional faith. All while the Aeternan banks sank their claws deeper and deeper into Krumaz's economy. While Krumaz was restored to peace, and the kingdom saw a post-war economic boom, their sacred way of life was slowly being flushed away by the Senate and people of Aeterna. Proconsul Chrysithic knew deep down, his stubborn people would not let this peace last long. But for now, things were good. The Aeternan economy had really blossomed under the Bank of Aeterna and their central market, by and large, so now powerful leaders in the state were also consolidating wealth as a class of shareholders called the Rabini. So any large government projects, grants, loans, everything would go through them. Thus, the EOC proconsul Secret Shirt 565 kept the province busy with monumental building projects. At one point, EOS gave the land deed of Astra Solarium to the pro-praetor Holy Panda 9815 to build it up from 2 tents into a proper city. But they didn't expect him to inject so much Aeternan culture into it, and so they whispered to each other with deep contempt. But then, Holy Panda 9815 became busy with another commission, and he handed the land over to the diehard Aeternan Rabinos. I get no girls, lol. Secret Shirt 565 demanded the land back. This was EOC land, and just rubbing salt in the wound, I get no girls, lol approached them and asked for citizenship in EOS. He was a landowner now. So the EOC people poured out into the streets in protest. They burned Aeternan flags and made a list of their grievances with the Eternal City. Stop the arbitrary funding. Add us into your monthly budgets. We will not pay your 45k tax. Do not desecrate our polyastralist temples with statues of Senator and Gonfist saints. And fuck your bank! So Proconsul Secret Shirt 565 went to the Senate and demanded Astra Solarium back. Just give this rightful Eosi land over to our guy, Keeper of Honor 03, lest you force this province that surrounds your city into an all-out rebellion. But Consul Mr. Pancake 21 accused him of ambition and spit acidic insults at him, and I Get No Girls just scoffed. No. The protests turned into riots, and people began storming the Rabini's warehouses in the province. Secret Shirt and Senator Huntmine demanded that the Eosi land be returned by this time tomorrow, where they would split the Senate votes and join the rioters. Pancake and Dead rolled their eyes and cursed them, but they went to I Get No Girl's home in the contested land, and they pushed him to negotiate. 10 million for the town, he said. No, that's ridiculous. You're wasting time. They will go after the banks and the Senate. So they sat and haggled there for the next 3 days. I Get No Girls eventually whittled it down to an also ridiculous $5 million. Pancake thought hard, exhausted from this whole ordeal. But he offered. He has 800 chunks of far-off land in Gubapest. If he put that up as collateral for a loan from the bank, he'll do the 5 million. So they shook hands. I Get No Girls lol moved out with his valuables. Mr. Pancake 21 received the land and gave it over to Keeper of Honor 03. Secret Shirt 565 joyfully led an Eosi procession back into the town under construction, pinning up the flag of Eos Astral, tearing down the home of I Get No Girls lol, and looting the remaining items. Pancake breathed a sigh of relief. Yes, he was in debt, but Eos would finally shut up. Everyone got what they wanted. But no, they didn't. Eos didn't see it that way. They may have gotten the land back, but what about all their other complaints? Nothing had changed for them in the other cities, and nobody took them seriously to solve the problem on their own. Were they really an equal province? No. And to top it all off, the old Pope ANCAP, known as Marcos Aeternios Cicero, founder and guarantor of the Republic, the greatest friend of Eos in all Aeterna, now quietly died in his sleep from old age. And that was it for Eos. Every reason to stay a loyal province had been severed. To hell with the Senate. To hell with peace. To hell with Aeterna. Eos and Krumaz then went suspiciously quiet, while Mr. Pancake 21 watched his Senate prattle on in unaware bliss. From Aeterna's perspective, Eos and Krumaz were finally deeply integrated into their national economy. The Rabini would pay above-market rates for people's labor. They'd constantly pour money into the provinces in return for armor stockpiles, and they'd give grants to provincial towns to Aeternize their culture and architecture. It was safe to say that the class of Rabini and the 3 Tresuiri who controlled the bank had a deep stranglehold on the province's economies. Things were great in the central city, but the provincials' resentment grew as the Senate passed new motions to Aeternize more, tax them more, and prioritize the central bank over the provincial banks more. The provincials would sit together and complain quietly, floating the hope for Krumaz's king Kilimanjaro 15 to execute his hush-hush plan to pack the Aeternan government with provincial loyalists and take over the Republic from within. But Aeterna had a double agent among them, who at night came to the city and told Mr. Pancake 21 of the stirring conspiracy. All of Aeterna's authority and culture could be eaten alive by their own provinces, leveraging the Constitution. Pancake met together with the consuls and rabbinis, and they hatched a plan to sow chaos. Operation Ragebait. Pancake and I Get No Girls lol got into a public spat, arguing and throwing out personal insults to each other. So Pancake went to the Senate and he made a radical proposal. Revoke the economic charter that bound the Bank of Aeterna in the market. Let the Rabini not hold such power over the nation. The senators nervously murmured, some even in agreement, until Grokyank's used his consular veto. I Get No Girls lol then wrote the Senate saying, don't bother. We will leave the nation if you wish. Don't come crawling back to us when you go broke and your unpaid soldiers mutiny. So the bank and the markets seceded away in rebellion, and I Get No Girls lol moved all the bank's assets to his personal belongings. As Pancake was filling the other Aeternan magistrates in on his plan, the Praetor Militaris Remy Gaming 000 pushed back against him. Was it really a good idea to backstab them so much? If they didn't play out this Operation Ragebait thing right, Aeterna could collapse and burn in a whole regional war with no money to pay the legions. But they then received word that Eos and Krumaz were watching the chaos unfold excitedly. See? It's a good plan. It'll work. But they then got word that the legatus of the 1st Legion, Soinsu III, was reporting grumbling soldiers wanting their regular pay. Okay, maybe Remy Gaming was right. The legions might be a problem. But that night, Mr. Pancake 21 won $870,000 in a game of poker, and he joked that even with the banks leaving, we're richer cause none of this has to go to Krumaz. The next Senate meeting was not productive. They needed to pass a budget for the state. In this debate, there was one little item that a Krumazi senator had added to the docket. Krumaz was requesting $500,000 for Hunt Mine to build a wall. But one Aeternan senator stood up and said he'd seen the plans for their wall. It would cost no more than $4,000 on a bad day. They put it to a vote. The EOC and Krumazi senators voted to give the $500,000. Some of the Aeternans scoffed at them, and they voted against it. It was tied. There remained one undecided Praetor Militaris, Remy Gaming 000. He looked around, unsure, but Pancake gave him an assuring nod, so Remy slowly raised his hand to reject the motion. The Krumazi senators said nothing. They got up and walked quietly out of the Senate House. Mere hours later, the Aeternans received word that Krumaz and Eos had formally declared independence from the Senate and people of Aeterna, splitting off as the United Kingdom of Krumaz. In their letter, they said that Aeterna had become too oppressive and dominating, but they were now too weak and unstable. How was their oppression under utter chaos anything but a deeply arrogant insult? So the EOC rigged TNT onto the bridge connecting Aeterna to their town of Vrelinyan and blew it apart, separating the main artery between the two countries. Some Aeternans panicked and they hid in their houses for an oncoming civil war. The streets went empty, but Pancake just smiled. He and Dead went to the Senate, who unanimously passed the Senatus Consultum Ultimum, naming them co-princeps civitati, dictators to claw back the traitorous provinces. Operation Ragebait had been a success. They had lured them to play their hand too soon and too suddenly, while behind the scenes, Aeterna still held all its cards at full strength. The excitement from Krumaz and Eos was palpable. Even the old citizens who moved away returned to partake in their independence. But they got a little careless as their own nation. They forgot to patrol and defend the lands around their towns. So the Aeternans sent word to a nearby people in the nation of Arenai, inviting the Miskin tribe to settle in the open wilderness of Krumaz. So the Miskins came in and settled 3 camps. The Aeternans expected Krumaz to march their ironclad dwarven armies to kick them out. Nothing. They expected them to reach out and try to buy the land or integrate them. Nothing. So, Aeterna sent the 1st Legion under Soinsu III to the Miskin camp near Dulce Colis. And in a brief skirmish, they secured their submission. Aeterna settled to buy the land back from them, and so they secured these scattered lands between the dwarven strongholds. Krumaz's leadership had their hope shot in the heart by this. King Kilimanjaro 15 immediately stepped down, demotivated by Aeterna's victory, retiring to the wild as a wandering monk. So the Ankoran priest, Suyut, stepped up, running the rebel nation from Vel Ukad, hell-bent on keeping this last bastion of dwarfdom alive in Abexilas. But Suyut didn't have many tools at his disposal, so the fighting for Krumaz slumped into a lull. But at this point, Aeterna's inability to pass a budget and draw from the bank started to bear fruit. The 1st Legion had just won glory overtaking the Miskins, still no payment. So Legatus Soinsu III petitioned the Senate to fulfill their salaries. 2 weeks, and no response. So Soinsu conferred with his legionaries, and together they sent a letter. They were going on strike. No orders, no training, no maneuvering against Krumaz until they got their pay. Soinsu then moved his legion and encamped at the south end of the Hudson River, right outside of the city. Soinsu attended the next Senate meeting as Legatus, but as he described it, it was the worst Senate meeting ever. Chaos. They refused to even discuss the military's pay, so he raged at them. Don't you 5-year-olds know what happens with unhappy soldiers? The next day, the Senate relented and sent them the required pay package. But the Legion was still thoroughly pissed about the weeks of hunger and disrespect. So Soinsu III demanded an apology from Dead, Grokyonk's Play, and Mr. Pancake 21. They ignored it. So Soinsu activated his authority as Legatus. He stripped the 3 magistrates of their titles in the military chain of command. They still refused to apologize. So Soinsu rallied the Legion to keep demanding respect for the army. The officer of the Praetorian Guard, Zukaz, stepped forward and called for Soinsu III's arrest as a rogue general. Sun Tzu saw this as a bluff, so he went into Aeterna to address the people, airing the legion's concerns to the public. But midway through, he saw the Praetorian guards approaching to arrest him on behalf of the Senate's magistrates. He fled from the Forum and linked back up with the First Legion, and they marched west, crossing small local bridges over the Hudson River. The First Legion crossed the border into the nation of Mycenae, finding hospitality to camp in their wilderness, and Sun Tzu wrote the people one final letter. Have we truly come to this? This Senate does not understand the words of those who have bled for them. It understands only force and authority. If that is the only language they comprehend, then that is the language we shall speak. From this moment forward, the First Legion declares that it will not rest until the princeps resign their extraordinary positions, elections are opened, and one of our own is installed for the coming term. Rally the Legion! We are marching upon the city of Aeterna! For the Republic! For the Legion! For the people! Alea Iacta Est! But Pancake was busy growing the Optimates coalition, the remaining senators, the Praetorian Guard, and barbarian mercenaries, all while Sun Tzu rallied his coalition of the Populares, the First Legion, the unhappy plebeians, and to everyone's eventual shock, the Gonfist Church, as the Pope and Cardinals sided with Sun Tzu's Populares in agreement with the common people's plight. But then, the leaders of Krumaz came to Sun Tzu with a deal. Fight together, execute Pancake, and Krumaz might join back in with greater protections. As all this was going on, the Gonfist Church had signed an agreement to recognize Krumaz's independence, as they feared that opposition would lead to retribution against his clergy there. But the Optimates spat at this. Princeps dead called for the expulsion of the church entirely. This was a gross violation of the Concordat that had secured the Republic's peace for generations, and they threatened to march into the Basilica, forcefully depose the Pope, and desecrate his altars. But just then, the Optimates had drawn up a masterclass diplomatic plan that could slowly ensnare Krumaz into a bulldog grip, and chew and choke the rebels until they were back in the fold. You see, nearby, there sat a little exclave of the mighty empire of Bardonia, one of the most powerful states in all of Stoneworks history. King Suyut, running his demotivated rebel state, approached their Emperor Kyborg with an offer. They would sell Krumaz and Eos's lands to Bardonia to be their vassal, and Bardonia would protect it from Aeterna. But King Suyut didn't know that Mr. Pancake 21 and the Bardonian leader, the eternal dandelion unicorn boy, were old poker friends. And Bardonia had its own geopolitical reasons to want Krumaz back under Aeterna, as their geopolitical rival Erwinor had once held Krumaz as a vassal, and a strong ally in Aeterna was worth well more than a weak rebelling vassal. So Unicorn Boy whispered in Emperor Kyborg's ear, and Kyborg went to Krumaz and spun a story about hating Aeterna and the Gonfists. Thus, the Bardonians became Mr. Pancake 21's double agents. The operations moved carefully, one chess piece at a time. The Krumazi lord, Mr. Waffle 52560, unexpectedly defected, handing the keep of Thulun Rabat directly to Aeterna, and the Senate showered him with praise and rewards. Aeterna then made a big show of mobilizing for war on the northern Eosi towns, and the rattled rebel leaders sold Kyborg the northern claims of Vrelinyen, Mauritania, and Diamond Co. for only 40% of their actual value. Kyborg and Pancake celebrated together, as Bardonia would hand everything back once the rebels' persistence collapsed. So Kyborg asked, what if we go further? They used this strategy across every remaining town. Threaten war, wait for the provincials to hand the city over to the friendly Bardonians, and grow the Bardonians' escrowed holdings. Mr. Pancake 21 even logged into his alt account, Bardonian Miner, and personally sweet-talked the mayor of Astra Nebula to hand over the city, and then he immediately gave it straight back to Aeterna. In the city Astralunarium, they backed their war threats up with leaked battle plans and fake terms for its surrender. Seeing the Aeternans mobilize for war, the old Krumazi leaders called on the far-off Empire of Erwinor for help. So Aeterna flooded the region with propaganda and invited the barbarian Den Mali tribe to migrate into Erwinor's south. Two Erwinor leaders met briefly with the Aeternans, sizing up the demotivated Krumazi working with the Bardonians, and decided it wasn't worth getting mixed up in all this. One by one, the lands of Krumaz fell under the Dandelion Empire's banner, without one drop of spilled blood. all until the elite Praetorian Guard was sent out disguised in the night, slipping into the Great Hall of Urd Ajar, occupying the dwarven capital for Aeterna. And so, Emperor Kyborg met with the Optimates in the Senate. Honoring his commitment to Aeterna and stabbing Krumaz in the back, he handed over every little bit of land for only $2 apiece, save for the holdouts in King Suyut's personal holdings, called Ankoran Aviv. The hearts of the Krumazi leaders sank as they saw the Bardonians hand their land back over to their oppressors. Songs of sorrow and lament echoed throughout their ancient halls, the underground darkness blinding them to the schemes of their overlords. The secession of Krumaz and Eos was essentially over, and the only blood spilled was that of some barbarian squatters, so the Krumazi sent delegates to negotiate with Aeterna. But Soinsu III was still out there, encamped in the lands of Mycenae with the 1st Legion. The Populares army marched in formation up the road, and the outnumbered Optimates under Princeps dead met them south of the city.
Aeterna! Aeterna! Victrix! Legio! Aeterna! Aeterna! Victrix!
And the two Aeternan legions fell upon each other. Shields smashed together as the legions stabbed and tried to trample each other. It turned into a massive shoving contest of the tight legions. As bodies piled up, Princeps Pancake took command of the reserve troops guarding the Senate House, and he whistled the call from the elevated cliffs of the east and hopped down. But just as they had flanked them, the Populares army broke the Optimates formation, and it became a loose, chaotic brawl. Dead gave the signal for the Optimates to retreat to the Forum fortifications, and the legion pulled back into the city with Pancake's reserve troops. The Populares got back into formation and marched after them into the Forum. The Populares army pushed up against the fortifications. Legato Soinsu gave the call, Testudo! And they tightened up to advance forward. They stabbed up at the Optimates, but arrows found holes in the formation. One by one, Populares soldiers fell. The defenders were knocked off their ramparts and burning fire. Soinsu's legion was constrained, so the Princeps ordered the defenders to fan out, and soldiers rushed in and slammed into the side of the formation. The legion broke apart, and the fighting devolved into a brutal hand-to-hand tussle. Optimates' arrows were free to let loose on the unshielded soldiers. The Populares fell one by one on the Forum floor. The stone that once held rallies and festivals now stained with the blood of Aeternan brothers and sisters. The Optimates soldiers grouped into gangs to chase the best attackers off the battlefield. At the breakup of his legion's cohesion, Soinsu III blew the whistle to retreat, so the Populares regrouped and they went south to build a hasty encampment right outside the city. The Optimates had won the Battle of Aeterna City, but Soinsu still threatened them right in their backyard. In the immediate aftermath, Mr. Pancake 21 marched towards the Gonfist papacy for their support of the rebel factions and sent a mercenary to go attack their clergy. Pancake sent them terms of surrender, demanding a new agreement from them. The Pope called an urgent synod, and so they negotiated better terms with the Optimates and signed the Second Concordat, which subjugated the church's public affairs under the heel of the Senate. This demoralized the Gonfist Populares soldiers, so they left the camp for back home, and Soinsu was deprived of nearly half of his fighters. The signal was clear. The Optimates had maneuvered a minor battlefield success into an unbreakable victory. During all this, the Krumazi delegation had been meeting for weeks with the Optimates, trying to forge a compromise that would leave both happy enough. The Senate was split and arguing once again. Do we mainly punish Eos or Krumaz? After days of arguing, the consensus formed. Eos had been a core province for far longer. They should have known better. They would salt the earth of Eos Astral. Thus, they voted to fully dissolve the province. Some of the Eosi rioted at this, attempting to burn down their own home cities in apocalyptic protest. But the Aeternans marched into the rising fires and unleashed a massacre upon the civilians. The talks with Krumaz were more peaceful and productive. Krumaz's territory would reintegrate and ownership would shuffle around. Bits and pieces would be fully Aeternized. Their Ankoran faith would officially stand equal to Gonfism, and their leader could sit on the bank's Treswidi board of directors. And Mr. Waffle 52560, for his loyalty giving over Thulun Rabat, received the lordship of the capital itself, and the province would be renamed Krumatia. so both sides signed the Concordat of Vel-Ukad, and 1 week later, the personal holdings of King Suyut in Ankoran Aviv folded back under Aeterna without a fight. The Dwarven King stood in front of his people and spoke. This was no loss, but a stable guarantee of their lives and rights as dwarves. This is why they laid down their arms, why they let Bardonia take up their mantle. For you see, the Krumazi agent who had been updating Aeterna on its conspiracies in the secession, it was Suyut himself all along. He had become king for Aeterna, controlled opposition that wouldn't get in the way of its reabsorption. He had never fought for independence or glory, but for survival, for the people, and for the lives of the gods. He was no liar. He had only come out on top. But for the rest of his life he would wander the dwindling stone halls, wondering if they would ever forgive his victory. After the Vel-Ukad Concordat was signed, Pancake snuck into Legatus Soinsu III's encampment. For 2 days, they secretly negotiated in the Legatus's tent. Was it ever worth it after such a defeat, Soinsu? Yes, we will still get the honor and dignity we are fighting for. So they hashed out a compromise, that all the Populares rebels would be given complete amnesty. Everyone would retain their original titles from before the war, and the Princeps Pancake and Dead would let their terms of dictatorship expire in just 2 days. And Soinsu would stop considering murdering the entire Senate, and everyone returned back to the city once again. The civil wars were over, Aeterna was whole once again, and the provinces were thoroughly subjugated under the boot of this imperial republic. The empowered Optimates flirted with the idea of holding a triumph, congratulating themselves, but gloating would risk alienating the unsuccessful factions. They didn't want any more fighting. They chose forgiveness to restore peace to the republic, as much as it could be restored, because in just 1 month's time, half the Senate would enter into the Senate House, never to return. The mixed joy and grief at the end of the crises soon gave way back to the Senate's arguing and bickering. After 3 months of chaotic strife, the politics were rearranging themselves, alliances reforming. The rich Rabini held stronger influence. Sessions were more tribalistic. Most notably, there formed a base of politicians that pushed against Mr. Pancake 21's continued leadership from behind the scenes, like the censor Zukaz and Rabinos I Get No Girls, lol. If this faction grew too strong, the Senate could totally ignore Mr. Pancake's plans for a reintegrated Krumaz, and he didn't trust anyone else to lock them down permanently, lest another civil war happen later. He needed to build a coalition and split his enemies fast, because the next round of elections was rapidly approaching. So Mr. Pancake 21 approached a young politician, soft like silk, and told him that he was politically savvy enough to run for military tribune. He should do it, but soft like silk refused, saying that he thought he would screw up the job. And this humility impressed Pancake. Pancake then turned around to notice a massive vulnerability in his rivals that he could leverage. His rival Zukaz and his ally in the court Stable Genius 123 both hated each other. So Pancake met with Stable Genius 123 at his house. See, Zukaz is a smart and capable threat to both our interests. We should kill him. So they hatched a plan to hire an assassin, give them citizenship as a cover, and send them with Zukaz as he attended the upcoming World Democratic Expo in the next couple days. They put their plan into action, but their hired blades failed them, and Zukaz escaped the conference with only minor cuts. One would think the city would be abuzz at the news, but Zukaz was controversial, and frankly, assassination attempts were becoming passé. Mr. Pancake 21 then approached the Basilica of Gonf. He told Pope Lineman Trent 77 that he resented letting his sharp political mind grow dull with age, so he handed over his will and testament, only to be opened after his death. Unbeknownst to anybody, he would adopt soft like silk for the humility and political guile that he'd seen in this young protege here. He was to take his name and the title of the Pancake. He'd be made a patrician, and he'd receive $3 million and his collection of rare artifacts. There was advice on how to schmooze certain power brokers, and how to build a proper political coalition for himself. As for the citizens of Aeterna, Pancake would pay the taxes for all Aeternans for a month. All the while, Stable Genius 123 with his sharp legal mind started a battle in the courts and the Senate against Zukaz, leveraging his power as legal Iudex to forcefully suppress his influence and make his life hell. But everyone watched as it devolved from a serious struggle to a cynical political card game. Stable fired the opening salvo by proposing an exhibitus maxima against Zukaz, trying to legally strip him of his positions. Stable's friend Grok played his consul militaris card to convince the Senate, and the motion readily passed. Grok then rushed a prohibito to officially condemn Zukaz, and Stable played infamous Historio to officially condemn his actions. Dead then stepped forward and convinced Grok, shuffling over a $300,000 bribe from the APAC lobby. So Grok then turned around and vetoed the bill that he had gotten passed, the Exhibitus Maxima. The Senate saw through this blatant corruption, and they rejected its paired infamous Historio. So Stable played a risky card. Declare a state of emergency, hoping to save the other card condemning Zukaz. The Senate was tied on the state of emergency. It could go either way. Zukaz then played the legal argument. State of emergency doesn't even apply retroactively, and Stable played to convince another senator. The state of emergency went into effect, and Stable played on his tight control of the judiciary, declaring that state of emergencies can now legally be applied retroactively to proposals. And then Mr. Pancake 21 stepped in and played an all-encompassing veto on the state of emergency. Everyone knew this whole thing was completely political bullshit. So Stable recognized that he needed to sway Mr. Pancake to be on his side. So he got the Senate to ratify the allied Holy Panda 9815's permanent Senate seat, and he condemned his rival Grok earlier bribe from APAC with the speech, "A corrupt and shameless excuse for a consul, Gracchus Gusios Venus." The confusing mess of legal battles thus came to an end, with nothing getting done and everyone bitter at everyone else. The approaching elections were only a couple days away now, and no one was better off for their infighting. These were the big races. Stable Genius 123 versus Mushy Mountain 46 for Praetor Civilis. Dead versus KatyCat 21 running for Edile. Grok versus Soinsu 3 for Consul Militaris. Zukaz versus I Get No Girls lol. An openly, dangerously unserious candidate for censor. So Stable went around trying to gain support from the magistrates. Pancake rejected publicly supporting Stable for Praetor Civilis, but Pancake returned to him, and he convinced Stable to vote for Zukaz as censor. Stable agreed and cast his vote early for Zukaz. This could help soothe their big conflict, and nobody wanted I Get No Girls lol to be elected censor. He would have way too much power over the Senate. But Stable was unaware that during these dealings, Zukaz and Grok were whispering in the ear of a young upstart lawyer named Rayla Sinclair. Stable had personally showed her around the courts and tutored her in the law codes. Stable genuinely had a deep love of the law, and her participation in it would help strengthen the judiciary that he dominated. But Zukaz and Grok criticized Stable with such vigor that Rayla Sinclair abandoned the courts and left Stable alone. And Stable flew off the rails, screaming and cursing these two for their interference. So he went around to every voting nobilis, patrician, and equites that would entertain him, and he convinced them to reject Zukaz, vote for I Get No Girls lol, spite Zukaz, who the fuck cares anymore? When the days for elections had concluded, Stable Genius 123 won Praetor Civilis, KatyCat 21 won Edile, Soinsu 3 won Consul Militaris, and I Get No Girls lol won Censor. Dread filled everyone's hearts at the chaos about to come, especially Mr. Pancake 21, as he had nearly no allies left in the Senate, and his whole political project and legacy was in danger. And the new censor, I Get No Girls lol, immediately set to work proving everyone right. He proposed a bill that would allow people to be racist specifically against Mr. Pancake 21. The Senate shot it down. So he exploited a loophole in the Constitution that would let him remove the 3 permanent senators, so he could appoint his allies Dead and Grok Pancake stepped in and vetoed it. I Get No Girls declared a state of emergency just to overturn the veto, and Pancake vetoed this too. It was genuine gridlock. The Senate factions were now 2 behemoths standing off, refusing to budge, and they both held the power to stop the other from accomplishing anything at all. The only thing left on the table was drastic action. So deep in the night, Stable Genius 123 was summoned to the Villa of Dead. There he found the anti-Pancake faction Dead, Grok, I Get No Girls lol, and Taser Philip sitting around a table. They eyed Stable without a word. He knew what was happening here. It wasn't his head that they wanted, but if he fled to alert the others, his head would be first. He didn't want this. Pancake was his close friend, but the blades spoke softly. It's us or them. choose wisely. So Stable grabbed a dagger, and it whispered temptations in his ear. Emperor. The next day, the Senate adjourned, but Mr. Pancake 21 didn't show up. Taser Philip, the friendliest to his face, appeared at his house and said that the senators had agreed to support his vision in reintegrating Krumaz, just to get it over with, to bring back peace and stability. And so Pancake went to the Senate meeting. He chatted with Soft Like Silk, but looking around, he saw some of his rivals were missing. He saw his other rivals moving away from him. He saw soldiers posted, ready to shut the Senate doors. There's an old saying that permeates every single facet of life in the Republic of Aeterna, from the ruthless world of politics to the bloody fields of battle. They say that betrayal never comes from the enemy. Thanks for watching. The server's play.stoneworks.gg if you want to join. If you want to learn more about Aeterna's revolutionary political system, here's another video. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, smash that bell button, and never forget the glory of the Roman Empire.